Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. And today I want to talk about all the books I read in October. I'm sorry, I'm laughing a little bit because I just tried to record this video and it didn't work. So here's hoping that this one works. The first book that I finished in October is Origin and Death by J.D. Robb or Nora Roberts. This is part of the In Death series, and I've said it a million times, the In Death series has become like my comfort food. I go to it whenever like nothing else sounds good, or I just need to read something that is gonna feed me but not be like it's not going to require so much energy from me. Like I often read these books on my tablet before bed, and like I know that I will have a good time while reading it, and at the end Eve Dallas will solve the crime. It is great. And this one in particular was really interesting. What some of the themes are about like doctors that try to play God and see themselves as above the law. And so it gave me a lot to think about without like requiring a ton of mental energy out of me. So really enjoyed it, and I will keep reading in the In Death series. The next book that I finished in October was Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Sáenz. So this was part of the books I was picking up for the Latinx Heritage Month. So this is an Own Voices Latinx story about two boys who meet as kids, and then kind of you see them as their friendship develops and as romance develops between them in a time in which it wasn't really acceptable, or there's a lot of social concerns when it comes to being gay. And the story handles all that quite beautifully, like very innocently at first, but then very seriously and heavy at times. And it was just really quite beautiful. You see one of the characters struggling with their sexuality, struggling with his home life, while the other one like struggles but has a lot more stability. And so you see like how the dynamics shape each boy, and how social ideas help shape them and their general understanding of their own sexuality. So it was really well handled. I really enjoyed this. I'm giving this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Really nice story. The next book that I finished in October was Las Intermitencias de la Muerte by José Saramago. So I have now read Saramago in English and in Spanish, and I just realized that Saramago writes in Portuguese. What was I doing? But I wanted to read something in Spanish, and this one was available, and I actually really enjoyed reading it in Spanish. I thought like the other book I've read of Saramago was Blindness, and Blindness is a very bleak book in a way that Las Intermitencias de la Muerte is not. Las Intermitencias de la Muerte is about death. A large chunk of the book is about death, but there's a lot of humor and sarcasm in Saramago's writing. I really enjoyed Saramago's writing in this book, and like would recommend it. Now, okay, what it's about. Las Intermitencias de la Muerte is about a country in which people stop dying, like just from like December 31st to January 1st, people stop dying from one night to the next. And some people are left in comas, or in this like in between stage where they're not alive, but they're not dead. No one's dying. And it reminded me a lot of Camus's The Plague, because it like delves into it, right? You're in this location, this where it could be any country in the world, and you're digging into the politics, the social change, the cultural effects of this one thing happening. And it was really interesting. Saramago was commenting a lot on corruption, politics, but also like just like realpolitik, right? So of like handling things realistically. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. But all right, the book is really disjointed in that for most of the book you're dealing with that aspect of it. But for the end, it's not really about that. The story shifts and it becomes about death, like death itself as a character. And it has different themes and a very different feel to it, so that it reads a lot more like two books rather than one. So that's why I'm giving it 3 out of 5 stars. Ultimately, it gave me a lot to think about. I really enjoyed it, but it is a rather disjointed story, and that there's more than one thing happening in one book, right? All right, the next book was Gabi, A Girl in Pieces by Isabel Quintero. This I'm giving 4.5 out of 5 stars. I almost didn't pick up this book because of the cover. It just didn't look like a book I would normally pick up, but I was looking for something to read for Latinx Heritage Month, and when it popped up from my library, I thought, well, maybe not. And ultimately, I'm so glad I did end up reading it because I really liked it. It's a story of a teenager, Gabi, who is Mexican American. She is navigating her light skin with her Latinx heritage, and it causes some difficulty because she's light skinned and feels like she is constantly having to prove herself to different communities. She's also dealing with the expectations of her mother, who is trying to drill into her the fact that like she cannot get pregnant, she cannot be a teen mother, she cannot be a statistic, but her mother also wants her to be independent and self-assured, and so it causes some conflict within Gabi. In addition, her father is an addict, and it is something that is present at key moments in her life. And then on top of that, Gabi is also navigating friendships. One of her best friends is pregnant, and the other one comes out as gay to his family, and it's not accepted. And so one of the things this book did for me was just remind me that like there are teenagers out there dealing with this kind of heavy, like just a lot in their lives, and that they deserve kindness. Like I really just wanted to give Gabi a hug and tell her that everything would be okay, that she's a good egg, good head on her shoulders, and that she just needed to get through these difficult years. But yeah, definitely, like I felt like also she needs some therapy, and hopefully at some point in her life she will have access to it, because when you're dealing with that much that early in life, it's a lot. It's a lot, and I felt like if she were a real character, she'd be in definite need of mental health care. Lots of content warnings, so homophobia, depictions of drug abuse, off-the-page rape and sexual assault, death, the death of an immediate family member, physical violence. It's a lot of heavy topics, but I also felt like the author handled it really well. Like at no point did I feel like, or like things were being handled superficially. Like I felt like everything was actually integrated into the story really well, and it all meshed well together. So I really recommend this book. If like me, the cover would have scared you off, please take a look at it. Take a look at other reviews. I think a lot of people would really like this book and just need to give it a little bit of a shot. The next book that I read in October was Labyrinth Lost by Zoraida, Córdova. This is a book that has been on my TBR for over a year. I knew I would like it because it is about a family of witches, and it's got a lot of Latinx inspired themes, and it's a Latinx family. It's a known voices story, and so I knew I was gonna like it. I just needed to pick it up and read it, so I'm so glad that I finally did. The story, you're following a teenage witch who is coming into her powers. She's the last of her sisters to come into her powers, and she's been rejecting her powers for a long time, it turns out, as her powers started to manifest when she was younger, but they manifested in ways that made her really afraid and made her reject all of that. But it turns out that she's a very powerful encantrice. To really come into her powers, she needs the blessing of her family, including her ancestors. There's like this ritual ceremony that's very reminiscent of like quinceañeras. But all right, when she's having this ceremony performed, she performs a spell that makes her whole family disappear. Or like that's the end result. Her whole family disappears, including all her ancestors. The only one left is this teenage boy that she's not sure that she can trust. But together they go find the family, and it's a bit of an action-adventure fantasy story in there. Family is really important in the story, which I loved reading, and I'm really excited that this is a series. I already went out and bought the second book, Bruja Born, and I am impatiently awaiting the next one as well, which I believe is coming out in 2020. Is it coming out in 2020? I'm gonna need to look this up because it's lots of fun. I'm really enjoying it, so that's great. I believe I gave this book 4 stars, 4 out of 5. Yes. And the next book that I read in October is Devil's Daughter by Lisa Kleypas. This is the 5th in a series, and I picked it up. I normally, when I read a series, I like to pick them up in order, but I have a student working on a project using this book, and so I just picked it up. I really enjoyed it. I'm giving it 3 out of 5 stars. It's a really charming story that follows a widow who has 2 kids. She's busy raising them. She doesn't care to get remarried, but she's feeling some of the social pressure from her family to find another husband. But she's not interested. She is an independent woman with wealth and money, so she's not interested. In comes the love interest. She ends up falling in love with a reformed rake. I really enjoyed a lot of the discussions about agriculture innovation versus maintaining traditions, for example. And yeah, it's just a cute, nice, very solid story. I really enjoyed it. The next book was a book that I read for my in-person book club, and it was The Cheerleaders by Cara Thomas. This is a YA thriller / horror. It's more of a thriller than a horror story, but you're following the main character, Monica. We're following her in the present time as she investigates the deaths of several cheerleaders, including her sister's death. So a bunch of cheerleaders died years ago, and they all died back to back. A couple of them were killed, we believe, by a neighbor who was caught, and the other girl committed suicide. So now in the present time, the sister of one of the cheerleaders doesn't believe that her sister committed suicide, so she's out investigating it because she thinks that maybe all of the deaths are linked together. I really enjoyed the mystery, I guess part of it, but not all of it, which is always a good thing when there's a little bit of surprise at the end in these books. But I also found that it was dealing with some heavier topics. There's a storyline of abortion in here that's handled a bit interestingly, in that like at first you're kind of guessing that that's what's happened, and then the more you read, the more clear it becomes. So abortion is not the main topic of the story. It's more of like a B or C storyline. So it's not tackled head on, but it's definitely there. Yeah, so very much present. There's also some heavier topics. For example, at the beginning of the story, our main character is dealing with the aftermath of a sexual relationship she has had with a much older man. She is a junior in high school, and so this is clearly statutory rape, and some of the parts that made me really uncomfortable here were some of the internalized victim blaming on the part of the main character, which like I just didn't want her to feel that way, and ultimately the book doesn't condone it, but like there's enough of it in there that I was just like, no, don't victim blame. So lots of trigger warnings in here as well. Violence, sexual assault, abortion, pedophilia, lots of heavy things, but ultimately I did enjoy reading it. I think a lot of audiences would like it. I had fun discussing it with my book club book, although most of the people in the book are parents themselves, and they didn't think it was necessarily a YA book because it deals with such heavy topics. I had no problem with it being YA, but I'm also not a parent, so I'm probably less likely to have an issue with that kind of thing. But just as an FYI there. The next book that I read tackles the topic of abortion head on. I read Girls on the Verge by Sharon Biggs Waller. And there's just no question that this book is about abortion. You open it up, it's right there on the page. It's set in Texas a couple of years ago, as Texas was passing laws that were very restrictive to people seeking abortions. And in this story, you're following a teenager who, at the beginning of the story, has already made this decision. She wants to end the pregnancy that the legal system has set up, despite this teenager trying to do everything by the letter of the law. It is a heavy topic, and one of the only issues I might have had with this story was that, it kind of plays into some of the stereotypes about the kind of people that seek abortions, and that, a single unwed teenage mother, and that's not the case of the typical person seeking an abortion. It is typically someone who is older and has already had children or other pregnancies. So this is not the most typical kind of story, but I still really enjoyed the story. I think it's still an important story. It has a clear political message, just as a warning to everyone that it's just very clear. At the same time, it does there's a character, a very religious character in the story, and I thought that character is handled very well, in that this character is not dismissed. They're not ridiculed. The religious position is handled with seriousness, but ultimately the story is not about that point of view. It's about the point of view of a young girl who is determined to end a pregnancy, and the lengths she will go to procure one in Texas in the modern era. So I thought it was also a very timely book, and very well executed. It's short, very readable, and for me it was 4.5 out of 5 stars. And finally, the last book that I read in October was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. And this is another book inspired by a project a student is doing. I normally wouldn't have picked up this book. It's very clearly about domestic abuse, and it's not necessarily something I look for in the books. And now that I know a little bit more about Colleen Hoover, I don't think her books are necessarily the kinds of books that I seek out or will be reading. But this one was a good one. I'm giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I thought that the topic was handled very sensitively and from a place of knowledge. It's told through the eyes of a woman who, as a girl, saw domestic abuse in her own home and rejected it, and didn't understand her mother for staying in a situation that was clearly violent and negative. So she's moved on with her life, she's older now, and she is falling in love. And some red flags start popping up with a love interest, and we see her navigating those from a place of she understands some of these as red flags, but we also see like how she's trying to rationalize it and seeing how someone could rationalize it. Those were the hardest parts to read, because as a reader I was sitting there saying, no, this is not okay, like get as far away from this person as possible, and yet the story is being told from her perspective, so we're getting some of the rationalization. Ultimately, the book is not rationalizing domestic abuse. It is not condoning it in any way, shape, or form, but we're getting an understanding of it from like a victim's perspective. It's also it is a romance novel. I was like, I almost told a student they couldn't read it because it didn't count as a romance novel, but it turns out it is. It's not with the domestic abuser, though. I want to make that clear. But they're parallel storylines where you're following the present, the past, and the difficulties of navigating relationships and family life in some of these situations. And ultimately, things end well, or as well as they can. And it was an enjoyable story with something that it turns out was very personal for the author. So if you're interested in stories like these, I thought this was quite well done. So there we go. Those are all the books that I read in October. Some things that I wouldn't have picked up without students, and other things that I've been meaning to pick up in a long time. I had the most fun with the Latinx books, and I hope that you might be interested in picking some of those up as well. If you are, or if you've read any of these, let me know what you think down below. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.